Okay, so it's time to look at the cockpit of Porco Rosso's plane. So I've primed and base coated a number of elements. So starting with the control panel, I have painted it in SMS brown. Let me get it in focus, there we go. So the pedals, I have to paint a little bit of detail on that, and it's going to be a little bit of steel and a little bit of black. So for the base coat I used this SMS brown. I'll be using NATO black for the pedals, and then I'll be using steel, so Model Air, Vallejo Model Air colours. So that's for the control panel. For the control stick, so I stuck this on the end of a toothpick, and the reason I didn't sort of attach it to this particular component is because I didn't know how solid it's going to be, and I sort of want to dry fit this bit in the fuselage to see if I can put the figure down into the cockpit without actually breaking the control stick. So that's why I've still got it separate. I can always glue it in place if I see that that's going to be a better option. So for the control stick, I believe we're going to be painting the top and the bottom of it in like a dark red colour. Let me just check that. Yes, I'm going to be using hull red 71039, and the center of the center of the stick is going to be also in steel. I've got the seat for Theo, which doesn't need any other colour. That's been coloured with this brown. Now this is probably a little bit dark. You'll see in a minute when I get to the fuselage, because I've used that for the inside of the cockpit on the fuselage as well. It's maybe a bit dark, but it doesn't really bother me that much because you're actually not going to see it. And finally we have Porco Rosso's seat, which again I've based it in that SMS brown, and I'm going to use that hull red colour to do the base of the chair. Now there's also some decals that I've got to apply. So I've got the seat belts for the seat. So I'm going to put them in, even though the figure's going to be sitting in the seat. I'm going to put them on just in case I want to sort of ever display it without the figure in it, or if I completely mess up the figure. The other thing is, for the control panel, there are some very small dials there. So I'll be adding those once I've completed all the painting. So when I'm painting, I know a lot of people, when I'm brush painting, which I'll be doing for this stuff, a lot of people will use a wet palette. For me, I tend to just use an old tile. I just find that I'm not doing that much painting that I need to keep it in a wet palette. So I find a tile works really well. I always water down my paints a little bit just with tap water, and I actually just use a decent brush. This is what do you call it? They're artificial bristles. They're not natural hair bristles, but I tend to find they're fine. They're a bit cheaper. And just a bit of paper towel to wipe any excess off. So that's sort of the process that I use. But before I go any further, what I need to do is talk about the fuselage itself. So you can see I've got it taped up. Of course, I haven't actually glued it. Let's get this out of the way. I haven't glued it, but I have taped it up. And the reason I've done that is because when I dry fitted it together, I had a bit of an issue. So I'm interested to see. Let's take this tape off. Now it's not an unfixable issue. It was just something that sort of caught me a little bit off guard. So when we push the two fuselage pieces together, there are actual very small sort of locator holes and corresponding pins. If we can focus, there we go. So you can see those, there's a hole there and one up the end. And yeah, there are a couple of locator pins, but the locator pins are very soft, so it's not a positive sort of fit. But if I put these two pieces together, and now it's not playing nice. Okay, so there's the nose. Put the nose together. I think it's camera's focusing on it. Okay, so you can see we've got it there pretty tight, but then you can quickly see how much of a bow there is in it, and when I press it together, there's actually quite a bit of force there, so it's going to need some serious taping after I've actually glued it together. For the interior of the cockpit, I've just based it in that brown colour, and you can see there's a little bit of detail in there, and in the instructions they call out for it to be done in steel, so I'll just run a brush over that with some steel, and probably put a bit of a dark wash in there, like a black or something. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really not going to be seen, so it's not that important, but we shall do it anyway because we know it's in there, and I've got video proof that it's been done. So these Vallejo paints, you want to make sure you give them a really good shake. Normally I have a mixing ball in there, but this one I haven't, sort of run out of them for now. So I'll just put the smallest down on the tile. You really don't need much at all. I will dampen my brush and brush off any excess. And so it's just a matter of picking out the raised details. There's quite a bit in here, which is kind of interesting given that, yeah, it's never going to be seen. Whoops. Now, I'm not too worried if I make any mess in here, because part of it will be covered up by the wash that I'm going to put in here, and the rest of it is the fact that it's never going to be seen anyway, so it's not that important. I certainly don't have a steady hand when it comes to brush painting. I do have the shake, so I try to avoid brush painting wherever possible for that reason, because I'm certainly no good at it. Okay. Alright, far from perfect, but just pick out a little bit of detail, and really going to be looking at it sort of straight down. You're going to see the figure. You are never going to see that. So anyway, I'll do that on the other side as well. It's interesting that they've gone to the trouble of putting this much detail in. I made a real mess of that. And poor old Theo, she gets nothing in her part of the plane. She gets nothing at all. Poor old mechanic. It's basically a plank to sit on, and that's it. So I think that'll do. That'll do. Wash. While I've got the steel out, I will do the other pieces that I know have to be steel. So I'm just going to check the pedals. I think yeah, it's the axle in between the pedals that has to be steel. So I'm literally sort of using, you know, just the tiniest bit of paint, and again, it is just never going to be seen. And it's proving tricky with the camera in a way. I probably shouldn't have glued this in place, but that's alright. I've got to put the black over that anyway for the actual pedals, so it doesn't matter how sort of rough that is, but it's just a tiniest little bit of paint in there for the axle. And the other thing I need to do is the middle of the main rod of the flight stick. So I've got the utmost admiration for people who do, who paint minis, because I do not have the patience for brush painting. Certainly brush painting accurately. It's one of those kids that couldn't colour within the lines, so I think I'm still very much like that with my model making. Here we go. Alright, so that's the steel done. Let's look at. Now you'll notice that I haven't mentioned the figures. The figures I'll be doing separately. We can actually get the fuselage together without having to put the figures in there first. So that's one of the positive things about having an open canopy. Alright, so for the flight stick and the bottom of the chair, I'm going to use red. So again, give it a really good shake. You only need the smallest amount. You really just need a drop. This is proving difficult with camera and a microphone in the way, so excuse me if I look awkward doing this, but I am actually feeling awkward doing it this way. That's alright, that'll look good. You might need a second coat on this, which I'll probably do off camera, but at least you get to see the process that I use, even if it's far from professional. Again, I might just complement that with a bit of a dark wash, and I will have to let it dry properly before I put the decals down, because the decals sort of go on the back of the chair, but they also drape on the bottom cushion, so I want to make sure that that's properly dry. And the top, and I assume these are supposed to be wood, and you know, who's ever going to see it? Only you lot are watching this. Now the good thing about priming it in black is that any details you kind of miss, you know, they just fall in the shadow areas, so it's covered in black, so it's not that much of an issue. And I mean, you're really not going to see that much of a difference on camera, but that's the control stick sort of done. Alright, so again, wash out the brush. So you can see how much I shake when I'm brush painting, but I think that will probably do. There's just the hint of silver, the black petals, and then once we get the dials on, that part's ready to go into the cockpit. So let's... Now to speed up the process a little bit, you can use of course a hairdryer to dry off the acrylic paints. So I'm just sort of keeping an eye on more specifically this chair. See if we can put another coat. Yeah, just put another coat on there. Might need a couple of coats, but I think it'll be fine. Again, no one is going to see it on the displayed model, so I can be a bit slapdash with it. Yeah, you can see here with brushes, I might talk a little bit just about cleaning brushes. It might be a bit hard to see, but there's still just a tint of the red from the whole red that I used. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some brush soap to bring that out. So I use this stuff. That's just the Masters brush cleaner and preserver, but you can actually use any sort of velvet soap will do it. You know, just good quality soap that you can get in the supermarket. So you get your brush wet and you basically just swish it around, and it is literally soap. So after a while of swirling your brush around, you'll start to see some of the colour come out. And of course you rinse out your brush in water. Take it back in. You want to maintain your point on the brush. So normally what I'll do is so this has been rinsed out in water, but a trick that I learnt, and again this goes to, you can't get everything online, like advice that you tend to follow. So my local art supply place, really helpful staff there, and I was talking about some of the brushes that I've had previously where I could not maintain a point on the brush, and so the advice they gave me was when you're using your soap to clean your brush, you can actually just put a little bit on there just by I'm just twisting the brush, getting a little bit of soap on there, and you actually store it that way. So it just means that the next time you go to use the brush, of course you want to rinse it in water because it'll still have that soap residue in there, but it just helps keep the brush sort of at that point. And what I'll do is I'll use one of these things, but you don't have to if you've got the what do you call it, the sleeve that goes over the top. You can use that as well, but what I'll do is I'll just put this in here and I'll actually just store the brush upright. I'll find the right one that it fits in. Yeah. So it just stores it so that any residual moisture flows down and doesn't get into the ferrule of the brush and ruin it, because that tends to be the main killer of brushes, is where you get paint and stuff down in the ferrule, which is the middle part. And when you get paint down in there, the bristles will sort of splay out because there's bits of stuff in there. So you always want to, when you're drying out your brushes after you've washed them, you want to sort of keep them in that vertical pointing down position. So identifying something like this works really well. So that's just a little tip on how I do my brush cleaning. So the next step is for me to maybe just do a little bit of a wash in here, just to give it a little bit of definition and cover up some of those errors that I've done. I think that's dry enough now. Okay, so what I'll be using to put a little bit more definition in here is just some Tamiya panel line accent colour, and this is the dark brown. So I'm going to give that a shot and see if that sort of see if that works all right in there. And if it's not dark enough, I'll just go up to the black. But you've got to give this stuff a good shake. The enamel-based paint tends to sort of separate out pretty quick, so you just got to be a bit careful with it. So all I'm doing is just touching the brush around, certainly along the edges, picking out any detail. There's a couple of what look like valve handles, so you want to sort of pick out the detail there. There we go. Just helps give a little bit more definition in some of those areas. I mean, again, it's never going to be seen, so what am I out of focus here? Just building it up in areas where I think there'd be probably a little bit more dirt collected. I wouldn't expect it to be brand new steel. It's certainly not super shiny steel, so I can just yeah, dull it down a bit. And this stuff dries matte, so it gives a nice matte finish. So this one I did sort of a major error on, but I think the panel line will probably hide a bit of that. And again, it's just not really that important. Alright, how's this going? I might just put a little bit of this just in the corners. Yep. And finally, what have we got here? I'm not sure. I don't think the dials don't have any sort of surround on them, so I think it's just the circles of the dials that are maybe white. What we might do is some of this mess. I might look at putting this decal down. No, I'll do both the decals at the same time, so I might just give the seat certainly a bit more time to dry, and then we'll do both the decals there. So for now, that's about as much as I can do with the painting. So again, just want to look at the dry fit. I'll try with get Theo's chair. I can cut this nub off now. Okay, so the way this chair, Theo's chair, works is that it gets glued in there and then it matches on the corresponding side. So I don't know if it's worth. I was hoping I could probably just dry fit it all, but I think I'm going to need to put some glue in there just to hold it in place. You want to make sure it's on a little thing, but the injector pin marks, you want them sort of pointing down so they're not visible at all. I'm not going to glue it at this stage, but what I want to do is just line everything up and get some tape on there. What I want to do is I want to make sure that the Theo seat is sitting down hard on the other side. So I've only glued it on the one side, but I want to make sure I've got it. Yep, looks like that's located beautifully. So you can see that we'll have once the fuselage is all glued up, we'll have plenty of room for putting both the figures in. I actually really like the way they've done some of the components on this fuselage. So if I should have been more prepared. So if we look at the mount for the wing, that will sliding like that. So once I've done all the cleanup of the fuselage, done all the sanding here, I can literally just drop that in place, which is nice. And also the hatch for Theo just slides in there and sits in there quite nicely actually, so I really like that. That's cool. But you can see, well, you can't see, it's just a black hole in there. So really, as far as the detailing goes in the cockpit, you're really not going to see that much at all. But anyway, so take that off. Okay, time for decals for the cockpit control panel and also for the seat belts on the seat. So just to show you what these decals look like, we have the seat belts here, into the water they go, and we have this little decal of all the little dials that go on the control panel. So just dunking that in the water, let that soak for a little bit. I haven't had a lot of experience with FineMolds decals, except on the previous FineMolds plane I did, and I didn't have any problems then, so I don't expect to have too many, but famous last words. Okay, I think I might leave this on the clip, might make it a little bit easier maneuvering the decal around and also keeping it in place. Sit, you silly thing. No, it's not going to play nice. Let's go that way. That'll do. Okay, I have my microsole. So now it's just a matter of sort of waiting for the decals to come away from the backing paper. I expect I'll probably be using quite a bit of the microsole. The dial detail on the control panel is quite deep. You can see the indentations there where the dials go. It's yeah, they're quite deep. So in order for those decals to really set in, I'm going to need a bit of microsole. So I'm just checking the decals now. Looks like they're starting to come away from the backing paper, which is good. So let's start with some microset. I haven't actually put a gloss varnish or anything over this. It's literally just over the raw SMS paint. So we'll see how that goes. Just take off some of that excess. Let's see if I can work out which way this needs to go. Where are my glasses? There we go. Alright. So we've just got to check the orientation. I think it goes that way. Just going to squeeze out that excess microset. Let's see if I can point to it. There is a little raised decal just on the end of that toothpick there, and the decal just needs to be trimmed sort of around it. So just keep an eye out for that one. I can see I do actually need to shift the decal around a little bit. get this on camera, it's a bit of a nightmare. But I think I've got it positioned well enough. So there are the recesses in there. So I think the rest of it I'm going to have to leave up to the microsol to do all the work. Now normally this is a complete no-no, where you would touch the decal after applying microsol, but what I'm trying to do, just gently, ever so gently, push those dials, the decals, into the recessed areas with the toothpick. So what I'm going to do is leave that now. I think I've got the dials located. I mean, it'll look reasonably okay when it's all flattened out. It's just because I've got the you know, the microsol on it that it's wrinkled up. I don't know what it is, microset, but geez, it smells like vinegar. Okay. Actually, I should start from, probably start from the top, might be easier. Okay, another mistake I've just realised. I've stuck on the chair on the backing plate there, but the seat belts I think are actually supposed to wrap around the back of the chair. So again, those of you doing this model, just be aware of that. So what I'm going to do is just bring it down a bit more. I think I'll probably trim that. So I'm just trying to poke it right in the back corner of the chair. Now the bit that folds under the bottom of the chair, what I'm going to do I think is put some, I might put some microsol on just before I sort of fold it over. See if this works. There we go. Beautiful. Alright, so now I'll just put some microsol on it. And make sure it sort of beds right down in there. Give it a bit of a poke with a stick. But I reckon that'll be okay once it all sort of dries up. Let's see how the control panel's going. It's looking pretty good. Put some more microsol on it. The thing with microsol is that it is somewhat mild. I think I mentioned this maybe in previous videos. It's not super strong, so it just does need, you know, multiple applications. But for me, I would rather do small applications, or sorry, regular applications, and have it not so strong that it affects the paint if it pulls up, because I've had that happen, or worse, where it melts the decal, which happened to me on the God Phoenix model. So, because I used some Mr. Hobby product, I can't remember. Yeah, so I prefer to use microsol because it's a bit milder, just needs more coats. Alright. So you can see the microsol sitting on there, but once that dries off, that should look reasonably convincing as a series of dials. Seat belts seem to be settling okay. So I'm going to let all this dry for now, and when I come back it will be to basically insert the components in the fuselage and get this fuselage stuck together. Okay, so I think we're now ready to close up the fuselage. There's a couple of things I did off camera just because it was so fiddly and I was never going to get in focus. So the seat and the control panel are basically just put in their slots, and what I did was I put the control panel in with the pedals. I put that in before I attached the controller stick because I had to put a bit of force on this, so I thought it was going to be just, you know, it was likely to break the stick off, so I glued that in after. So these are just dry fit. I don't think I even need to glue them in there. They're in there really tight just because of the paint layers. So they let's see if we can get nice and close on that. There we go. So you can see the little bit of detail in there. Of course, the seat belts, the pedals, and yeah, so I think I'm just ready to sandwich these two fuselage pieces together. I think it's going to require some reasonable amount of clamping force, and I think so. One of the things that I use is Tamiya tape, which is good for sort of taping fuselages together. I use a combination of glues, so I use obviously extra thin, but I also use the quick drying stuff, and I find the quick setting or quick drying stuff is really good if you just want to do sort of really quick welds. Yeah, I just tend to find that's really good. So let's see how we go putting this together. So I'm just going to line it all up, and I can feel just a little bit of force in there. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start gluing in the middle here between the, yeah, basically in the middle of the fuselage. So I'm going to try and get that right first, without dropping it, and try and sort of hold it in place. I think there'll be, so what I'm going to start with, and this is going to be a bit of an experiment to tell you the truth, because I never really know what I'm doing. So I'm just using the quick setting, and I'm sort of applying quite a bit of force here, just to try and hold that together. Alright, so I'm applying a bit of force there, just hold on a bit to flush it off so it dries. I may have to go in there with the tiniest amount of putty, and what I tend to use is Mr. Hobby Surfacer, some of the thicker stuff, because it's really good for doing really fine stuff. You can build it up. So normally when I'm doing sort of two pieces that have to go together like this, especially big pieces, whether it's, you know, an aeroplane or mecha or whatever, I try not to do it all at once, because that just proves to be a bit of a nightmare trying to line everything up. I find if you do, you start with one place and then sort of move around the edge of it, lining it up as you go, it should be okay. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is try and get this, I might tape it in the middle here. Okay. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is the nose. Yeah, I'll do the nose before I do this little bridge bit here. So I want to get this nose sealed up because it's got a noticeable sort of gap in it. So for this one I'm going to use just the normal extra thin, and I'm going to get it down in the gap. So hopefully I get enough glue in there that I can, when I squeeze it, there'll be a little bit coming out, a little bit of melted plastic. It'll help fill that seam. Yeah, so it's a bit hard to see, but some of that has oozed out. So once that sort of flushes off, that should be good. If you have that bead that sits along the seam, you can sand it off and you don't need to worry about sort of filler. I'm just using finger pressure here. Round things, I don't have any sort of clamping devices that work really well for cylindrical round objects, so just going to have to be patient, so do it by hand. And I mean, this extra thin cement, even the normal stuff, it tends to set reasonably quickly. You want to leave it a good 24 hours before you start sanding it, but it will actually sort of grab reasonably quickly. Now, given that the nose is kind of the focal point of the plane, I want to make sure that that's requires the least amount of cleanup and least amount of opportunity for things to go wrong. Yeah, so you can sort of see the dials in there. It's just a nice little bit of detail, and you will actually sort of see in in reality you can actually sort of see them. They're quite noticeable, so it's good that that detail's there. Of course, you've got the seat belts in place. They're a little bit shiny, but Porco Rosso is going to be sitting on the seat, so you're not going to see it anyway. I'm going to run just a bead of the quick set stuff just along the bottom. I'm going to need a new jar of this stuff. Now, I've heard some people say that the quick setting stuff is, not as strong. I've not sort of experienced any issues with it, so I don't know if that's sort of the case or not. This might be a good case just because there's quite a bit of you know, the pieces are kind of warped, so they really want to separate. So, all right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to let that go and see what happens. See if it seems to be grabbing okay. So you can see there's a bead of extra thin along the top, which is going to be good. It means minimum amount of filler I'm going to need when I'm actually sanding the nose of it. So I think that's good. So I'm not putting tape over the glue because the glue hasn't really set properly, but just give it something to sort of keep the two halves together. Probably, yeah, once it dries a little bit more, I might put tape all the way around. But even though the pieces are a bit warped, I mean, you can see that back, you know, that back piece is splayed out quite a bit. But it seems like there's enough flex in it that I think it'll be okay once it's all cemented together. All right, so let's have a look at some of these other parts. Yeah, I think there's the tiniest bit. Do we let the let's turn some light on. There's the tiniest bit at the top of that chair, the back of the chair, where I probably need to touch it up with a little bit of putty or smooth it out, and then just a little bit of paint over it, I think, just to tidy it up a little bit. I don't think it'll be seen once Porco Rosso's sitting in there. His head will be in the way, so not likely to notice it. But I know it's there. I think there is going to be quite a bit of work cleaning up this seam line. I don't think it's going to be that. There's going to be, yeah, quite a bit of work in it. Which is a pain, but cannot be helped. Alrighty. And some down the guts of this. So I'm going to let this flash off just a little bit more, and then I'll put some tape right around it. Actually, that might be right now. Just so that in the unlikely event it does want to sort of break away, it can't. Alright. I don't know if you can see, but you can actually... You can't see it. I can see it though. There's actually, you can see daylight through this bottom gap here, so I need to make sure I get enough glue in there to deal with that situation. Now the other thing I haven't considered is whether this plane actually needs to be weighted or not. It's a bit late now, I've sealed up the fuselage, but I'm not sure if it's, I mean, it's going to be sitting on a stand. I'm just hoping it's not, you know, heavy one way or the other. Given that the engine is sort of mounted on the wing in the middle of the plane, I don't think it's going to be an issue, but I know a couple of planes I've made in the past, I've had to sort of put a weight in the nose, or otherwise they end up doing, you know, pointing in the air when they're on the ground. I don't think that's going to be an issue with this one. Just checking whether I can see sort of daylight through it, so I'm just holding it up to a light and you'll see whether through this gap here whether I can see any sort of light coming through, but it looks like it's fixed. If I look down the other way, yeah, it looks like it's sealed up all right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is basically leave this to dry for at least 24 hours, and then we'll be looking at sort of the cleanup of the fuselage and getting ready for painting the rest of the plane, because I'll be able to sort of go into more assembly once I've got the fuselage all sort of sanded, prepped, ready to go. I think that'll be good, be well on the way.